Welcome to Give It a Nudge. Now today we have a guest who is a good friend of mine, and he has quite a fascinating business that I think right now in the current ecosystem is super, super important, because I think we're going to be coming out of this slightly quieter time going into a time of growth, which is exactly what he does. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks so much.
Let's sort of have a chat about your business, Entrepreneur Purpose. Why don't you start the show off by just introducing yourself briefly, your name and so forth, but then really what your business is, and then a quick elevator pitch on what it does, and then we'll get into the details.
Absolutely. Well, my name's David Keir. I'm living here in Sydney. I spent a long time, big part of my career in China, actually 24 years.
Long time.
Long time. A long time, half a life, half a working life. Built a few companies, including Domino's Pizza. Founded Dash Brands. We built Subway first, then rolled that into Domino's. Macquarie Bank came and invested, scaled it, grew it, all the normal growing pains, strong board and so forth. And actually that company I sold out about 4 years ago, but the company IPO'd earlier this year in Hong Kong. So it's been a great outcome for the investors and shareholders, some of the early stage guys that backed us. So that's really great.
Yep.
And what I'm doing now is really I'm bringing those learnings to other great entrepreneurs, and I like working with great entrepreneurs and helping them scale their business. So I'm a metronomics coach, which is a sort of a framework for scaling businesses.
Yep.
And I help people with their strategy execution and getting their team right, A players, great culture, and building high level of trust. And so I'm very much about working with people that stand for something and trying to make a change, and sort of values and purpose driven. And
Cool.
So that's what I do. I implement metronomics and I use my experience, and it's really exciting work.
Now I have downloaded the metronomic books after we talk. I've got it on my Audible.
Yeah.
And as you know, I'm doing a lot of cycling at the moment as I'm training for this race. So I plan on listening to it on my next 3-4 hour ride. I'm going to get a good chunk into it. But before we sort of touch on that, I just want to go back to you a little bit. So, like you mentioned, long time in China. So why don't we sort of go back? You know, what, I guess, drew you to end up there, and then what drew you to come back to Sydney? We'll go through that story a little bit with us.
Great question. I travelled as a student, uni student, went to Indonesia.
Hope so. Everyone does.
Everyone
right?
does.
Have to.
And so in my case, it was all around Asia, India, and there are a lot of countries I loved. I loved India. I liked going through Indonesia. But when I went to China, I liked it, but I felt it was the future.
What year was that? Because that would have been
1990.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well. Yeah. It was still pretty.
Yeah.
Hadn't had its boom. It was on the cusp, right?
It was still bicycle China.
Yeah.
Right. It was,
Not even moped China. It was bicycle China.
Yes, it wasn't. It's still, they had the BPGs, the beepers.
Yeah.
And so I went up there, had a look, and I just had a sort of a sense, look, this is what I want to do. But I better not come here without experience. If I just turn up as a student, there are a dime a dozen. Be a language. So I went back to Australia, got a couple of years experience. Actually, I was working for the government. I worked for the Treasury and the Industry Commission, as it was known at the time.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, a little bit of a reformed bureaucrat. And so then I went up to China, ended up working with Deloitte for a couple of years. Yep. And so forth and so on. And what really drew me back, well, once you're in and once you start a business, and I started Dash Brands in 2007. Mm-hmm. So I'd been there a while already, but once you've started a business, you're not going home until you finish the business.
So you're out, yeah.
But I come from the Northern Beaches and in Sydney, and I'd always wanted to go back. I'd gone to Queensland Uni and I'd worked in Canberra and China, and I just really wanted to go back. So when my oldest daughter, finished high school, and I'd already sort of stepped back from the business.
In China, right?
In China, yeah. She did at one of the international schools there.
Yep.
I decided it was time. I'd started a travel business that was China-Australia sort of travel, and it gave me the freedom to be able to come back here.
Cool.
And I've been back 5 years or so, and it's been amazing every day.
So I'm intrigued by one thing, because I have had a little play on it, and obviously I see my children doing it because it's so much more part of it. Language, like it's such an alien language compared to English. You know, obviously there's languages like Spanish that apparently, and I'm not a language person, are very easy to learn if you know how to speak English. Mandarin and Cantonese, and I don't know if you speak both. I think you speak a bit of Cantonese, but mainly Mandarin. Is that right?
I speak zero Cantonese. I tried and failed.
But it's completely different, right? So.
Yes.
Did you, when you said before you went, did you learn it before you, I'm assuming you learned some, but how proficient were you before you headed over there?
Look, I'd gone to a TAFE course. I was working full-time in Canberra, and I did a TAFE course, and I could probably order a beer
Because there's not a lot of Chinese being taught here back then.
There wasn't. And so I could probably say thank you and please in a few words, but really... But then
Surely that was a barrier.
I actually went to language school. That's where I started. Right. So my enrollment was, the girlfriend I had at the time had been in Beijing. She said, go to this language school. And so I did that for a few months. And that's what got me. I mean, it was sort of stuttering Chinese, but then I started working and I got a degree of fluency just by working because I was thrown in. I was the only local in most of the work situations, only foreigner, I should say. And so, it was hard. It is a really different language. And sort of talking language, my daughter, who was born in Sydney, grew up in Beijing speaking Chinese, has come back here to Sydney and taught herself Portuguese, Spanish and French on top of a Chinese and English. So Jeez. Some people have got it.
Some people have got it.
I don't.
Well, a lot of Europeans speak 5 or 6 languages. So
they do.
Not uncommon. Yeah, I think there is a certain brain for it, probably like artistry or maths. So I think there's a certain.
I think people that have got that perceive through listening rather than visual people, it's easier for them, especially Chinese because it's tonal. I'm a visual person. I think. Funnily enough, a lot of lawyers I knew are sort of auditory people and they pick the language up really well.
That's interesting.
For what it's worth.
I find, in fact, the reason I wanted to ask that question, we had someone on the show last week who was a fascinating story, actually. It'll come out soon. I should introduce you to him. You'd like him. He was a refugee from Kosovo, moved to New Zealand, didn't speak a word of English. And I've met a lot of people who have gone to countries where they don't speak a word of that language. And they usually end up having quite a lot of success. And I'm just wondering, on a personal opinion, because I think it does, resilience is key to success. Everybody knows that. Do you think going into such an alien environment where you can't communicate and you don't actually know what's going on around you builds a sense of resilience quicker than perhaps others? Because it adds such a level of difficulty to everything, not just building a business, but everything.
I do. And I think if you go to a new country to live, you end up with a bit of a missionary purpose. That you're going to make it happen. Either you do or you check out. Or you leave, yeah. Or you check out. And there certainly was that. And I think in my case, there was sort of when I got a phone call from a former colleague when I was thinking about what to do after I'd worked at a couple of companies. And he called me up and he said, hey, listen, David, we're going to buy the rights to Subway restaurants in Beijing. We want to find someone to be the general manager. Do you know anyone? And I just had this epiphany. It was like an electric charge. I said, I'll do it.
I love Subway.
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's what I said. And so I sort of, from that moment on, I was just this passionate.
Was it instant? Was it?
It was instant.
In that phone call?
Because I'd been at Deloitte through .com and a lot of colleagues jumped out from the various firms. And I'm like, nah, just doesn't interest me. And then I got this call and it was like the light went on. And off I went, and that charged me, the belief, and I just went through my entrepreneurial career with that. And I think back to my growing up, I worked for the government, and that was really interesting. But one of the reasons I left was I couldn't see myself. We went to the Christmas party each year in Canberra, and every year it's still the red tie, white shirt, and just a little bit grayer. And I didn't want to be that person in 20 years. I just didn't. And I thought back, I'd driven taxis on the Gold Coast while I was at uni. And you do a 12-hour shift and you wouldn't stop for a break because you're always chasing a fare. And there were times I did 24-hour shifts, which you wouldn't be able to do now, but we did then.
No way.
And it was just like a buzz. Because I got all this cash and that's how I funded my Asia travel. And so I think there's a little bit of a who you are as to whether you're an entrepreneur, what ticks your boxes. And so I had that zeal, which helped with the resilience. But China's tough. China's really tough. And I think probably in ways now it's tougher than it was, even though back then it was tougher and it was more raw. So yeah, absolutely resilience.
And Subway, right? I mean, when you launched that in China, was there a lot of other fast food already there? Like was Macca's there, was Pizza Hut there? Was there anyone else there, or was that very much sort of one of the pioneering brands? Sure.
McDonald's had launched, and KFC and Pizza Hut had all launched. I think McDonald's, KFC around 1990, Pizza Hut around 93 when I got there.
Yeah.
We went to the first Pizza Hut restaurant regularly as part of our student thing. And so there were a few of them. But Subway, Subway's quite different, the way they prepare the food, or the whole experience, different.
Right? Yeah.
And so with Subway, there were a few, we bought an existing operation and I went in and ran a store and turned it around and then so forth. And it was quite... and being a success. But I'll never forget sitting in a meeting with some franchisees, because we had franchisees. And there was about 4 of them. And these people that have invested $100,000 to $300,000 to build restaurants, which at that time in that country was a big play. And they ran Subways. And they said, listen, David, we've got a question for you because we just don't understand. What's the difference between a hamburger and a sandwich? And that was the level of perception it was at. And that's not a comment on them. It's just where the market was.
Yeah.
And so it was
embryonic.
So embryonic. And so it went through the phases. And at a certain point, we were able to recruit people that had come out of McDonald's and so forth. But that wasn't probably until 10 years after the point I just mentioned.
So how long was that from you saying yes on the phone call to exiting out? What was the length of time of that? What was that, 10, 15? How long did you do that?
Well,
and obviously you bought
the Beijing business I went in, I said yes in, I think, 2005, and I exited that in end of 06. Or it was about a 2-year experience.
Yep.
I sold out. Those guys, it's a different approach, and I gave them a shotgun offer thinking I'd buy them, and I set the price probably too low. They bought me. Subway said, go to Shanghai because we like what you're doing. And I went to Shanghai. I met an investor, Frank Krasovic. He backed me. We started Dash Brands, which then we built initially Subway, then Domino's.
Yeah.
So that was probably, I'd call the start late 06, and I exited China in 17.
Oh yeah, so it was a long time.
Yeah.
It was a long time.
But as the line sort of lead, I ran it from 07 to about 12, I think, 5 or 6 years. Then I stepped back to the board. So
I've got a question for you around that period, because I think this question is more relevant to that period than what you're doing now, which we'll come on to in a sec.
Yeah.
What was the worst piece of advice you got given? And you would have been given advice from everybody because you're about to launch something into a new country. What was the worst piece of advice you got given during that period? Can you remember? What was maybe it doesn't have to be the worst, the funniest, the stupidest, the like, what? When you kind of looked at someone and said, really? Did you really just say that?
So it was a little after that, we're running Subway. And Subway's whole deal is you can, we mainly franchise, we don't want you to own too many. You can only have local rights in a small area, a part of a city, never have national rights, and you can't IPO.
Right.
And so we wanted to find a better option. And you could see it had given us credibility, but it wasn't going to give us the big payday.
Yeah.
So it would be all right. And so I started talking to Domino's, and I've happened to know someone in their area manager in China, was a really good dude, and we hung out and so forth. And it ended up, I brought it to our company, our board, and so forth. And I got told, David, don't talk to Domino's. Let's focus on Subway, because that's where it's going to go. And I just knew. And so if Domino's is what actually made us our money.
Interesting.
So yeah.
Everyone loves pizza.
But when you're in the thick of it, it's not always clear. So I'm
Never
a little
clear
bit.
when you're in the thick of it.
You sort of got your intellect and your modelling, and we did all of that. But there's got to be a bit of gut feel in what you believe too.
Oh, 100%. Gut feels.
Decisions.
Yeah, it's such an important part of building anything, I think.
I think.
So you came back here. You've been back 5 years.
Yeah.
Your business, which I'm going to call EP, so that I don't mess my words up.
That's fine.
That's been going 2 years, right? Or 4 years?
2 years.
2 years, right.
2 years.
So what did you do in the 3 years in between? What happened between when you came back and when you started EP? What were you doing, and how did it lead to EP?
I wrapped up my travel company.
Okay.
So we built this travel company. The whole premise was to get the rights for outbound travel from China as a foreign-owned company, and there was only a few that had it. And we were actually going up the approval process, and we were told we'd been approved at the penultimate stage, and we're a week or two away from the final approval. And it was just up at Chinese New Year time. COVID hit.
Oh.
During that Chinese New Year, the industry shut.
Never came back.
And it just never came back. And
wow.
Hundreds and thousands of travel agents closed in China, and we persisted for a while, but ultimately it was
arrow through the heart.
Yeah, it was tough on me, and I had investors that had, and business partners, and it was, we'd all put a lot in. But you that's what I call a force majeure, if ever there was one.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely.
So I did that, and then I thought I'd like to work with other entrepreneurs, and I'd like to focus on something in Australia.
And did you know Metronomics then, or was that the time when you sort of discovered it? Or
that was when I discovered it.
Yeah, okay.
I wish I had known Metronomics back when I was building, Dash Brands.
Yeah.
Yeah, damn, because I was looking for an answer, and there was actually another system called Scaling Up at the time, which unfortunately I didn't know about, but yeah.
And how did you come across Metronomics?
Talking to people.
Oh, just
a friend of mine who was doing some coaching was one of their coaches, and she told me about it and said, you got to do this. And what I love about it is it brings everything together in a cohesive system, particularly the people side and trust and culture to support strategy and execution. Because strategy and execution won't happen without the right people in the right seats and a high trust environment.
Yeah.
And it's just month by month, and you know this, we've done a bit of work together,
have.
quarter by quarter. You build trust, you get the right people, and it empowers. And yeah, that was fantastic. And the other thing that sort of inspired me is I've been in a couple of franchise systems and coaching systems. The founder of Metronomics, Shannon Susko, is someone I really respect. You know, triathlete like you, really hard running.
I haven't made it through the race yet. Budding triathlete.
Look, I know your training schedule. And so she's amazing, and she's really about values and treating people right. So it's good to have someone you can respect as a leader. And I think that's something I take to anyone I work with. As a business leader, that's really, you got to walk the talk, and it's who you are every day, every minute that's going to create the company.
Cool.
So.
All right, well, let's talk about EP. So.
Sure.
You launched it. For anyone who's watching, and there's a lot of founders that watch this, a lot of business owners that watch this, and there's a lot of wannabe business owners that watch this. Articulate it really far better than I can. Why don't you articulate it exactly where you think you would come in, whether it be at the beginning, the middle, or later, or where you're at, and what the added value is, and what the full sort of suite of services is that you're offering.
Sure. Well, I work best with companies that are probably at that startup going to scale up phase.
Yep.
Where you're starting to get a team around you. You've got 2, 3, 4 people around you, and you're past the raw startup phase.
So how do you, I mean, it's a good question, sorry to interrupt you, but I get asked this constantly. What's the difference between a startup and a scale up? I know what my answer is, I'm not going to tell you, but I want to know what's your definition, because there's no clear-cut rule.
I'll give you 2. Okay. As a coach, my definition is got a team including 2 to 3 people that are good management, that aren't just EA level.
Yep.
They're actual managers helping lead the business. And when you've got that team around the CEO or founder, that's when you can really, and in addition to that, obviously EBITDA positive and reasonable revenue. I generally say revenues sort of 8 to 10 million or more with that team. That 10 to 20 million range seems to be where you really see the scale up piece come in. As an entrepreneur, you're out of survival, you're not living from funding to funding, there's a bit of cash flow, and you move from having sort of personal high net worths or friends and family investors, if you're using investors to grow, to either family office or more institutional. There's been a shift. And you obviously have the team, as I mentioned.
Yeah.
So there are 2 perspectives I look at it, and generally, once you get past 10, you're out of raw startup phase, or hopefully. It depends on the industry and so forth. And once you're into the 20, 30 range, you're really in scale-up territory, in my view.
And so you come in, and so I guess when people come to you, is there...
What's your definition?
I'll give you my definition. My definition is a little different. My view is, and nearly all the companies we work with are venture-backed. Not all of them, but 95% of them. So my definition is, when you have a runway, which for anyone who doesn't understand, a runway is a length of time before your money runs out. So you've got $1 million, you can run the business for 8 months before that $1 million runs out, 2 years, whatever. You've got a runway. I think when you don't have a runway, when you don't have a clear runway, i.e. you've just raised $80 million, so that runway could be 7 years, but you're also generating enough revenue, there isn't really a runway. So it's kind of like, okay, we're now not just operating on this cash, we've actually got a business that can continue operating for the foreseeable future. That to me is the definition of scale up, and up until then you're still a startup. So you've actually become a genuine business that isn't concerned about running out.
Self-sustaining business.
Yeah, self-sustaining. That's kind of how I define it.
Yeah.
I mean, again, that can be 10 people, it could be 80. It varies enormously. I mean, there are some very big startups who have very short runways. So yeah, it can vary.
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. But so tell me, when they come to you, they go, what's the typical founder, business owner that comes to you? What are they looking for? Or what are they missing?
I'm overwhelmed. I've got that we're doing some really good things. The business is in good shape and it's growing. But, I'll look a bit at culture, then I'll look at strategy, and it's a little bit like whack-a-mole. And I need to bring it all together. And I'm finding it hard to sort of have the team aligned with we started out, we were so fresh, everyone had belief in what we're doing and everyone shared the culture, but now it's bigger and that's starting to slip. So how do I keep it up? I want to make sure I've got people that I hired early that may not be the best for the ride for where we are now and where we're going.
Yeah.
How do I deal with that? Our strategy's done really well so far, but it's hard for me to think beyond next year. And so we have a budget, but to think beyond that is hard. So it's really about where they're going and in an aligned way, bringing it all together. So they tend to be overwhelmed. There's a lack of clarity on sort of direction, longer term direction, and culture. And a lot of the things that they drove with passion in the early days, they're now having to institutionalise. Yeah. They'll have systemised to some extent, but systemization is usually basic processes. It's not about systemising the way your culture is propagated or building trust in the team. And almost certainly, when you ask a CEO of a scale-up company or a startup about the level of trust in their company, they'll say it's great. Everyone trusts each other.
Everyone.
But when you go deeper and really go deep, of course, trust is demonstrated when the chips are really down, as values are. You only know someone's values not by what they say, but how they behave under real stress and when they have to make hard choices. And it's the same with trust. If you know you can trust someone under real duress, and if you've got an idea of everyone on your team's profile, maybe their psychometric profile or their emotional profile, and you understand their behaviours are driven in that respect, that's when you start to see trust build.
Yep.
And be amazing. And high trust teams that are executing at a high level, you walk in a room, you know it, and they know it, and it's amazing. And it's a million miles from when it's not. So what I do is I take businesses and teams from what I just described to that state, high trust, empowered, cohesive execution on a brilliant strategy that everyone really believes in, with values and purpose everyone buys into and demonstrates every day. That's what we create.
You're enabling them to come up with a clear way of moving forward. So they've reached a point, and that's kind of where we were when we met, right? I was kind of at this point where you go, oh my gosh, where are we going now? And I'm so busy, I've stopped thinking about those wonderful things that I used to think about. And you feel overwhelmed because there's been so many things. You probably don't have enough people really for what you're doing, and the roles aren't defined enough. And we had very little process documented, as you know. In fact, none. It was all in everyone's heads. And I think that was, it's that growing up, I think, as a business owner. It's probably the right time when you need to grow up as a business owner.
You do, and the growth never stops.
Yes, and you're there for the journey. Like, it's not just to sort of come in and point them in the right direction. It's an ongoing partnership.
It's ongoing, and obviously everyone will have to decide what they want to do, but we generally think in 3-year periods.
Okay.
So there'll be a long-term, what's your BHAG, your big, hairy, audacious goal, but then from that, what's your 3-year plan? And sort of our view is that doing a 5-year plan, and I know this from my own experience, and Metronomics says it is, no 5-year plan's worth of paper it's written on, because who knows what's happening in year 4 or year 5.
Look at 5 years ago from now. I mean,
just can't. No. But year 3, it's still a bit out there, but you can definitely do your 12-month budget and roll that forward 1 and 2 years and have a degree of confidence. And the way we do it, and the tightness you get in that process, it actually becomes really robust. And one of the best things about being a Metronomics coach is seeing great companies exceed their 3 HAG.
Absolutely.
And have a new 3 HAG that's beyond what they could have dreamed. And it happens regularly with
hugely rewarding.
Hugely rewarding.
What's the funniest thing that's happened during, because like us, we deal with a ridiculous amount of people and a ridiculous amount of clients. You're probably not as transactional as we are, but you get to see some ridiculous things. I could write a book on all the ridiculous things I've seen in my life in recruitment. Is there any particular scenario you've had that was just almost ridiculous that it was funny? And it could be success, it could be failure, it could just be ridiculous. Is there anything?
Can I tell you 2 stories?
You can, absolutely.
So I'll go back to the past for one. We were, just on my personal story, we were about to get Macquarie Bank to come in out of their own balance sheet, and they brought their senior people up from Hong Kong to Shanghai. We just opened this new, what was called a pizza theatre concept store, first one in Asia. You go in, you see the pizza being made, perfect for China.
Yep.
And we'd opened the store for about a month or 6 weeks, and these guys come up, and we walked down for lunch this day. It was a Tuesday. And there's a line out the door, and the whole store's full of boxes. And they just received, late the day before and hadn't told me, an order for 250 pieces.
Oh.
And so we're bringing the Macquarie guys in, and we're standing in the middle of this just bedlam.
That's a lot of pizza.
A lot of pizza. And they're just like, you are scamming us. This is such a setup. They were joking. And it was just like, you couldn't script it.
Who orders 250 pizzas?
It was a corporate day.
But who orders 250 pizzas without a few days' notice?
Maybe it was a few days, but we got those type of orders, and it's like these guys walk in, they're like, "Is this a good investment?" I was like, and so that was.
What do you reckon?
There was a lot of laughter around that, and then look, just with advisory, it's just you see things. I'm working with companies that revenue between 5 and 10 that are so buttoned up and systemized and passionate. It just blows me away. And I'm working with a company that's got revenue of 120 million.
Loose as.
And the company's run out of an Excel spreadsheet.
It's awesome.
And it's just the you know, what you see and the personality profiles of different and CEOs and founders and
yeah,
you know, without breaking confidences, there's a lot of stories.
Well, I mean, that's what I love about dealing with founders. The variance, you know, when you deal with corporates, there's much of a much to a degree, but with founders, it's just wild, the variance of people you see.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it's great.
Cool. Yeah. All right. So if anyone's watching this and they're interested, I guess, do you have like a minimum qualification, and what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Best way to get in touch with me is to send me an email or give me a call.
Yep.
Maybe we can share that on the.
We can stick that on the bottom of the video, but also I'm assuming you're on LinkedIn. I'm
on LinkedIn, David Keir, K-I-R, Entrepreneur Purpose.
Yep.
So I'm there. I'll talk to I love talking to great entrepreneurs, great founders.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
Whether or not we proceed to work now or later, there's usually a great conversation.
Yeah.
So.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Stephen. I enjoy working with you. We've got
it's been good.
One of these great entrepreneurs right here.
It's been fun. It's good having you on the show as well. But it's and it's opened my eyes to a lot of things. As you know, I'm not a trained person in any way, and that I didn't go to uni. I haven't really done any schooling, so it's all just off the cuff.
Every time you talk about yourself, you preempt it with a qualification, and it's an understatement that you're underselling yourself. What you've done is amazing.
Well, thank you. And thank you very much for coming on and sharing everything with our viewers.
Thanks, Steve. Wonderful.
Thanks very much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed today. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next week.